The rain fell in steady sheets, creating small rivers along the curbs of the Boston streets. It was late autumn, and a cold wind cut through the city, making the downpour feel even more unforgiving. In a quiet, middle-class neighborhood, the chill was especially bitter for those who had no shelter. Among them was a man whose ragged clothes hung loosely on his frail frame, his gray hair matted to his forehead. He sat against the brick wall of a closed cafe, shivering as the water seeped through his thin coat. This man was Alexander Hayes, a name that had once commanded respect and power in the corporate world. Alexander was the founder and CEO of a billion-dollar investment firm, a man who had once lived in a penthouse high above the city with a loving wife and 3 beautiful children. But that life had been shattered in an instant. A year ago, an accident had stolen away his entire family. His wife, Emily, and their 3 young children, Mason, Ella, and Lucas, had been driving home from a weekend trip when a drunk driver veered into their lane. The crash had been fatal. They were gone, just like that. In the wake of that tragedy, Alexander couldn't bear the emptiness that filled his life. He withdrew from his company, severed ties with friends and colleagues, and eventually ended up on the streets, a shell of the man he used to be. The only things he carried with him now were a few tattered photographs of his family, which he kept in a worn leather wallet, and a heavy blanket of grief that seemed impossible to lift. He had lost all desire to live, feeling that if he couldn't have his family, then life wasn't worth living at all. Each day he sat in the same spot, staring into the distance, his once bright blue eyes now dulled by despair. It was during one of these long, bleak days that a young girl noticed him. Her name was Mia Johnson, a 16-year-old who had seen her own share of hardship. Mia was an orphan who had lost her parents when she was a child. With no family to take her in, she had grown up in foster care, moving from one house to another. Now, as a teenager, she was trying to make a life for herself. She worked part-time jobs, doing everything from babysitting to cleaning houses, just to pay her rent and stay in school. Despite her own struggles, Mia always tried to help those around her, believing that kindness was the only thing she could offer when she had nothing else to give. Mia had first seen Alexander sitting by the cafe on her way home from work. He looked so lost and defeated that her heart ached for him. Without knowing why, she felt a pull to help him. At first, she just left some food beside him, a sandwich or a bottle of water. She never expected him to thank her, and he didn't. But she kept leaving small offerings whenever she could spare them, not minding the lack of acknowledgement. One day, she worked up the courage to sit beside him. She didn't know what to say, so she just sat there, sharing the silence. Eventually, she introduced herself and told him about her day. She didn't expect him to talk back, but to her surprise, he eventually did. It was nothing more than a few grunts or nods at first, but it was something. Over the weeks that followed, their brief encounters turned into longer conversations. Mia would bring him an extra sandwich from the diner where she worked, and they would talk, mostly about small things, like the weather or funny stories from her day. She never asked him about his past, sensing that it was too painful for him to share. And Alexander never spoke of his old life, though he found some comfort in Mia's presence. There was a quiet understanding that grew between them. Mia looked forward to their talks, and Alexander found that for the first time in months, he had something to anticipate. Her kindness touched something in him that he thought was long dead: hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He was amazed by Mia's resilience, seeing how she worked so hard despite having so little. In her, he saw the kind of strength he used to pride himself on having, but had lost after the accident. One rainy evening, Mia sat beside him again, as usual, holding out a cup of hot chocolate. "Here, this will help warm you up," she said, offering him a small smile. Alexander hesitated before taking the cup, his fingers trembling slightly from the cold. He took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through his body. "Why do you keep helping me?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse and raw. It was the first time he had questioned her motives, and there was a hint of suspicion mixed with gratitude. Mia shrugged, her eyes meeting his. "I guess because someone once helped me when I needed it," she replied. "And because I don't like seeing people suffer if I can do something about it." Alexander stared at her, a mixture of emotions swirling inside him. "Thank you," he murmured, the words feeling unfamiliar on his tongue. From that day on, their bond deepened. Mia didn't just bring food anymore. She brought stories from her life, little pieces of herself that she shared with him. She talked about her dreams of going to college someday, of finding a stable job, and maybe even starting a family of her own. As the weeks passed, Mia became more than just a kind stranger. She became a friend, a daughter he could never replace, but whose presence filled a small part of the void in his heart. But just as life seemed to be taking a fragile turn for the better, Alexander disappeared. Mia returned to their usual spot one day to find it empty. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of him. The loss felt like a fresh wound, reopening the scars from when she had lost her parents. It was like losing family all over again. She couldn't understand why he had left without a word, and it broke her heart in a way she hadn't expected. One afternoon, as Mia sat in their usual spot, trying to make sense of the loss, she saw a group of men walking toward her. They were dressed in suits, stepping out of sleek black cars. Fear tightened in her chest. What could these people possibly want with her? She started to stand and walk away when a familiar voice called out, "Mia." She turned, and there stood Alexander, though he looked different. He was clean-shaven, his hair neatly combed, and he wore a suit that fit him perfectly. She barely recognized him. "Alexander?" she whispered, still in disbelief. What happened? Where did you go?" "I had to get myself together," he said, his voice filled with a new strength. "There's something I need to show you. Will you come with me?" Though hesitant, Mia followed him to one of the cars, where they drove to a grand estate just outside the city. The place was nothing like she had imagined for the man she knew. There, in the warmth of a luxurious living room, he told her the story of his life, the accident, the loss, the grief that had consumed him. And then he spoke of how her kindness had given him a reason to hope again, to fight his way back from the brink. "I want to repay you," Alexander said, his eyes glistening with emotion. "You gave me a second chance when I didn't think I deserved one. I would like to adopt you, if you'll let me." The tears came before she could stop them, and Mia nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. For the first time in a long time, she felt the warmth of a family she thought she had lost forever. The moment Alexander made his offer, Mia felt a rush of emotions she hadn't experienced in years: joy, fear, disbelief, and above all, a profound sense of hope. It felt like a dream, one that she was scared to wake up from. She had spent so long fending for herself, pushing through the struggles of a life without family, that the idea of being adopted at 16 seemed almost too good to be true. Yet, as she sat there in the opulent living room, looking at Alexander, who was once a broken stranger on the street, now a man with purpose in his eyes, she saw sincerity. This wasn't just a gesture of charity. He truly wanted to give her a family, and for the first time since her parents' death, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of belonging again. I don't know what to say," Mia stammered, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't have to say anything right now," Alexander replied gently. "Take your time. It's a big decision, and I know it's not an easy one." Mia nodded, wiping away the tears that had escaped down her cheeks. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had spent so many nights wondering if life would ever be more than a series of small struggles and temporary solutions. Yet here she was, being offered a chance at something she had always secretly yearned for: a family. That night, Alexander arranged for Mia to stay in one of the guest rooms of his estate. The room was larger than the entirety of her apartment, with a soft bed covered in plush blankets and a large window overlooking the sprawling garden. For Mia, it felt like a different world entirely, one she had only glimpsed in movies or through the windows of grand houses she had walked past as a child. It was hard for her to settle into the luxury, to believe that this was really happening to her. She lay awake for hours, staring up at the ceiling, wondering if this new life would last, or if it was just a temporary reprieve from the harsh reality she had known. In the days that followed, Mia and Alexander began to navigate the complexities of their new relationship. Alexander took Mia shopping, insisting that she get some new clothes and anything else she needed. At first, Mia resisted the idea of spending so much money on herself, feeling like she was a burden, but Alexander reassured her. "Mia, this isn't about the money," he said as they wandered through the aisles of a department store. "It's about giving you the chance to live comfortably, to have what you need without worrying all the time. You've already shown me the kind of strength it takes to survive with nothing. Now, I want to show you what it's like to thrive." Gradually, Mia accepted his kindness, though she still struggled to believe she deserved it. There were moments when she would catch herself feeling unworthy, wondering if Alexander would regret his decision to take her in. But each time doubt crept in, Alexander would be there, whether with a kind word, a thoughtful gesture, or just his quiet, unwavering support. For Alexander, adopting Mia was as much about healing himself as it was about helping her. She reminded him of his daughter Ella, the same kindness in her eyes, the same determined spirit. Although Mia could never replace the children he had lost, she filled a void in his heart that he hadn't thought could ever be filled again. He saw in Mia the resilience he had forgotten how to find in himself, and her presence became a source of strength that helped him to continue moving forward. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Also, kindly like and leave a comment to encourage us to make more stories. Don't forget to tell us where you are watching from, and until we come your way again in our next story, enjoy the rest of your day.